webinar featuring Fujitsu NetCOBOL is sponsored by GT Software. Now, before I introduce our presenter, Tim O'Brien, I would like to do something fun, and we want to kick off today's presentation with a couple of quick poll questions just to kind of gauge your interest and see how your relationship is with COBOL currently. So I'm now going to launch our first quick poll, and you should see it appear here on your screen. Our first question, as you see, is where are you running your COBOL applications? And you have three choices there, and you can select more than one. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to do that, and I'm going to break in here and do some housekeeping notes to get us set up for our webinar. First of all, please note that all of the attendees today are on mute, so you don't have to worry about making any noises because we won't be able to hear you. So just relax and enjoy learning more about COBOL. Now, sometimes it does happen, but if you are experiencing any technical difficulties, you can use the chat panel located at the bottom right of your screen to send me any problems you may be having, and I'll work hard to get everything fixed and correct for you as fast as possible. And also, if you should have any questions at any time during the webinar, you can also use the same chat panel to send me any questions. Now, to make sure that Tim is able to get through the entire presentation in the time we have allotted, we're going to hold all questions until the end, but anytime you have one, just feel free to send it right on to me. So I want to thank everyone. We've got some great response so far to our first poll. I'm going to just give you a few more seconds for our last minute people that have joined us to vote, and then we're going to launch our second short poll. So thank you so much. And now up on your screen you should see our second poll. Here it is. What COBOL compiler do you have? If you could quickly answer that for us, we'd love to find out what's your experience with COBOL and which compiler you have. Now, the information that you have provided in this poll and the last poll we'll touch on later in the presentation, but we think that this information would be very valuable, not only to you, but to our presenter, Tim O'Brien. It'll help us shape today's webinar and make it a better, more interactive experience for you. Before we get started, I am pleased to introduce today's host, Tim O'Brien. Tim has been involved with technology, specifically legacy mainframe applications, since the early 1980s. Beginning his career as a member of the U.S. Air Force, Tim worked on the mainframe conversion of the personnel system from a Burroughs to Honeywell platform. Tim later joined Perot Systems as one of its first 200 employees. Tim has worked with several large software organizations, including Fujitsu. While with the U.S. Fujitsu development team, Tim worked with Microsoft testing NetCOBOL for .NET. And later, when he worked for Microsoft, Tim assisted other Microsoft partners with large mainframe migration initiatives, often serving in an architect role. Today, as an expert on mainframe technologies and migrations and the Director of Enterprise Solutions for GT Software, Tim serves as the principal technical liaison for partner and client relationships, including the one that exists between GT Software and Fujitsu. At this time, I'd like to give you any last-minute chance to answer our poll up on the screen. And of course, without further ado, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Tim O'Brien. Tim?
Thank you, Brandy, very much. Hello, everyone. I'm Tim O'Brien. Thanks for joining us today for our Refocus on Savings webinar series. Today we'll talk about COBOL's very impressive legacy, how relevant COBOL still remains, and we'll review some history and evolution of the language. We'll also discuss some very important considerations when choosing a COBOL compiler and review some important things to think about regarding total cost of ownership. I'll also take some time and share some customer success stories with you so that you can be provided with a real-world, tangible example of customers who've achieved significant savings with their COBOL environment. But before we start, I'd like to tell you a little bit about GT Software. GT Software is a global distributor of Fujitsu NetCOBOL. GT Software was founded in 1982, and we're committed to providing world-class innovative solutions to governments and industry alike through a worldwide sales and support network. We're laser-focused on the future, but we also recognize the benefits of tried and true technologies. Our product portfolio is comprised of products that support legacy platforms and newer open systems or distributed technologies. Many of our products allow us to bridge the gap between these types of technologies and allow customers to leverage new technologies and migrate application and data workload from the mainframe or leverage application and data workload on the mainframe through these thoughtful and innovative technologies developed by GT Software. We've been a trusted partner to over 2,500 customers worldwide. We've worked with customers from many industries, finance, healthcare, manufacturing, aviation, energy, just to name a few. We believe that we are uniquely positioned in the marketplace to help our customers meet today's IT challenges. Back in 1945, former British Prime Minister Winston Churchill said, "America at this moment stands at the summit of the world." When you look back at the late 1940s and 1950s, it's easy to see what Sir Winston meant. Back then, the United States was the world's strongest military power. The U.S. economy was booming, and the fruits of this prosperity, the new cars, complete with tail fins, suburban houses, and other consumer goods were available to more people than ever before. The 1950s was certainly a time of great change and truly the beginning of an era for our industry. It was a time of invention and innovation. One of the most important things to come out of the 1950s was COBOL. Its longevity is only exceeded by Fortran, but the difference is that COBOL has a much wider adoption owing to its capabilities and initial design objectives. Now, there have been many changes to COBOL since its first introduction back in 1959. While some of the changes have been implemented gradually over time, revisions to the standard are generally categorized into 5 major evolutions of the COBOL standard. The late 1960s saw the first incarnation of the initial evolution of the COBOL standard into an effort to standardize the language and overcome incompatibilities between COBOL vendor versions. The American National Standards Institute, or ANSI, produced the first USA standard COBOL in August of 1968, which became the foundation for all of the later COBOL versions to come. By the time the second major implementation of the standard came around in 1974, COBOL had become the most widely used programming language in the world. The 1974 COBOL standard contained 44 separate changes to the 1968 standard. And in 1985, ANSI published the third major revision to the ANSI standard. In all, 60 features were changed or deprecated, and many new features were added. Now, I've captured a milestone here I think is pretty important. In 1977, the Gartner Group reported that 80% of the world's businesses ran on COBOL, with over 200 billion lines of COBOL code in production and an additional 5 billion lines of COBOL being written annually. That is an extraordinary milestone. Published in late 2002 is the fourth major revision to the COBOL standard.
Can I jump in for a second? We're having some interference and sound on the line here. I'm not really sure what's going on with that. Okay, but it seems to have cleared up, so I'm sorry for that. I was just getting some reports. But everybody seems to be able to hear you now, so thank you.
Okay, great. My apologies for the sound problem there. So we'll talk about the fourth major standard, which added object orientation to COBOL. COBOL vendors like IBM, Fujitsu, and Micro Focus all introduced object-oriented syntax based on the drafts of the 2002 standard. Also in 2002, Fujitsu Software introduced the first COBOL compiler targeting the Microsoft .NET framework. And finally, there's the 2014 COBOL standard. That was published to address some of the shortcomings that were in the 2002 version of the standard. So when you look back at where COBOL started and kind of reflect on how far it's come, one can't help be impressed by its durability in the marketplace. The COBOL language is used globally in governments and businesses and runs on many diverse operating systems such as ZOS, VME, Unix, Linux, and of course Microsoft Windows. I think it's safe to say that Grace Hopper would be pretty proud. Now, over the years, we've all heard the almost religious arguments against COBOL. It's old, it's verbose, there are more modern languages and technologies that are a whole lot more flexible, and then there's that final insult. COBOL was not as cool as all of the new languages. Well, the fact is COBOL has had such a wide adoption in the marketplace that its reputation as a reliable, stable technology is pretty secure. COBOL has had a much coveted position in the marketplace. My feeling is that it's here, and in all probability it's going to stay relevant for the foreseeable future. The fact is that there's just too much COBOL out there to think otherwise. New changes to the language continue to bring enhanced interoperability and flexibility. Even so, COBOL remains reliable, stable, and predictable. Because of this, COBOL will continue to rise to the challenge of modern application demands. Now, as modern application landscapes evolve, COBOL has been extended to remain relevant and to allow close integration with new tools that result in streamlined development and maintenance, all while offering great flexibility and savings. Now, throughout all of COBOL's existence, there is one other thing that has become pretty clear. Fujitsu has been pretty committed to the COBOL language. Now, Fujitsu was one of the very early players in the mainframe space with their own Facom 100 mainframe computer in 1954. Fact is, Fujitsu continues to manufacture mainframe computers to this day. Over the course of the past several decades, Fujitsu has acquired companies like ICL and Amdahl. So Fujitsu has a long history in the industry, a long history with mainframe technologies, and a very long history with COBOL. Fujitsu recognized early on that COBOL had a great deal of potential and could be deployed on many different platforms. Over the years, they've ported their mainframe COBOL to platforms like HP-UX, Solaris, Linux, and of course Microsoft Windows. I think what's even more impressive is that Fujitsu COBOL has not only been deployed to those other platforms and operating environments, but it has evolved to take advantage of new technologies like .NET. Now, technology companies like to tout the fact that they've built the next best thing, but they often lose sight of the value that tried and true technologies bring to the table. Fujitsu COBOL has been around for many, many decades, just like the rest of the COBOL compilers in the marketplace. But what I think sets Fujitsu apart is the fact that Fujitsu remains dedicated to the preservation and adherence to standards. So if you or your developers code to the COBOL standard or the .NET standard, you can be assured that you have a reliable and predictable technology that your business can depend on. All of these things, all of these things give Fujitsu a great deal of credibility, and it's this leadership in the marketplace that gave Microsoft the faith to depend on Fujitsu to deliver the first COBOL compiler for the Microsoft .NET framework. Fujitsu is very proud of that singular distinction and remains dedicated to evolving NetCOBOL for .NET to support Microsoft's .NET technologies. So now let's talk about some important considerations regarding the selection of a COBOL compiler. For many technology purchases, hardware and software costs are usually the easiest part of an investment to quantify. These would be the hard costs. Most companies understand that technology acquisition costs are not the only costs that need to be considered. There are additional soft costs associated with any technology acquisition, and compiler technologies are not exempt from this. In today's presentation, we'll present a holistic perspective of both the soft and the hard costs that go into the purchase of a COBOL compiler. Now, some of the soft costs would be training, operational support for the infrastructure, management, all the maintenance, the product support, and things like that. All of the factors that you would want to consider when running your data center. Other factors that must be considered when choosing a COBOL compiler technology and vendor are the capabilities of the language and of the implementation. There may be also some hidden costs that may arise because of these feature implementations and compiler technology. In my mind, there's little doubt that some of these issues can have a tangible effect on business agility and the ultimate quality of your compiled application. Most organizations that use COBOL have their business rules embedded within their application portfolio of COBOL code. So it's important to make sure that your COBOL compiler provides a high degree of performance as well as good adherence to ANSI standards. Now, adherence to ANSI standards is not really just lip service. It's really an issue that may have a potential impact on your ability to ensure that the COBOL code that you have can remain relevant into the future. Non-standard vendor dialects and non-standard vendor add-ins may potentially be the cause of some significant headaches when it comes time to evolve the COBOL code. This issue may also cause you some considerable consternation when it comes time to leverage and extend the capabilities of your COBOL programs when utilizing or integrating new technologies. It's important that your COBOL application portfolio retain its agility. If your COBOL compiler locks you into a proprietary COBOL dialect, features, or proprietary tools, then your company will ultimately be held hostage to COBOL vendor demands to pay increasingly higher and higher fees. Your COBOL vendor may also demand that you upgrade your COBOL to a different new COBOL compiler product, even though the compiler that you have may continue to be a suitable choice. Now, depending upon backward compatibility or adherence to previous development approaches, this issue all by itself may have all sorts of unintended consequences, from ever-increasing costs to the need to retrain your COBOL programmers to utilize the new compiler technology. One other thing that I want to mention here, poor compiler quality and poor support can have a significant effect on your organization. This may cause reduced productivity as well as lower the quality of your end user application. This right here represents one of the many hidden costs that I think are important to consider. Now, I mentioned agility and quality in the last slide. While these two particular topics are not the central point of this presentation, they play an impactful role in your overall costs, over and above the hard and soft costs we're looking at in this presentation. To learn more in depth about these two areas, you can join us for our 2 future webinars coming up in the first week of April and the first week of May. The April presentation will focus on agility and is titled Gain Agility in a COBOL Compiler Without Jumping Through Hoops. That's going to happen on April 1st at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And the May presentation will look at quality considerations of a COBOL compiler and is titled Getting a Quality Compiler for COBOL Shouldn't Be Restrictive. That'll happen May the 5th at 2 p.m. Eastern. So that's what's coming up. Before we get into the rest of today's topics on COBOL compiler costs, let's take a quick poll. COBOL compilers often have very different cost structures, so let's kind of quickly assess the challenges that you face with the costs of your COBOL compiler. Brandy, would you go ahead and run that poll, please?
I'd be glad to, Tim. Shortly on your screen, you're going to see the poll that Tim just mentioned. What's interesting about this poll is that it's going to help us get a better idea of what your current relationship and experiences are with COBOL. So on your screen, you'll see that we have a question here. Please select the descriptions below that best describe your organization's experience with COBOL runtime fees in 5 different scenarios that may best describe how your organization is experiencing COBOL today. So we're going to give you a couple of minutes to answer that. So far, so good. I see we've got a lot of great responses coming in. I'm very excited, learning so much about the audience. And also, Tim is going to briefly talk about the 2 polls that we did earlier, too, in a later slide. So we appreciate all of you being such great participants. Let's see, I think I'm going to let this run for a few seconds longer so some of you last-minute folks can get in there and do the poll. Oh, we still have some numbers coming in. Look at this. Tim, you're very popular. Look at you. Okay, I think the numbers are holding steady, so I'm going to go ahead and close out the poll and share the results with everyone. All right, so up on your screen, let's look at the results. Okay, looks like everybody has some relationship with runtime fees, whether they're high or some people might not even have them. Most of our audience, we have an even tie here between folks that have high runtime fees with a need to reduce them and the runtime fees that are manageable, but they want to work on a new platform. Then our third place winner is no runtime fees, but wanting to move to a new platform. And then coming in tied, 18%, our runtime fees, they're easily managed, but licensing is an issue. And folks, we have some people that are running in a virtual environment, but they also need to lower cost. So Tim, what do you make of that? I think you probably have some great solutions coming up that would help many of our friends.
I do believe that we do, Brandy. I do believe that we do.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's go ahead and pick up with the presentation. As we can see from the poll, there are a lot of you that are looking for ways to reduce your IT spend. Many companies consider their IT operations to be a revenue-generating profit center these days instead of just a cost center. And that's pretty much the reality that a lot of us live in today. Do more with less, get the product to market quick, improve responsiveness to customers. Like me, I'm sure that you've heard a lot of these things before. Now, as I indicated earlier in this presentation, the fact is that with so much COBOL out there, it's not practical for all of it to just go away. COBOL code has a great deal of value. It's reliable, it's predictable, and more often than not, it's stable. One singular advantage for customers who use COBOL is the fact that Fujitsu NetCOBOL compiler licenses can be a lower cost alternative versus the competing COBOL vendor in some cases by as much as 17 to 25%. Coupled with the state-of-the-art development environments that are available, either Eclipse or Microsoft's Visual Studio, that allows developers to work with world-class tools. These development tools and environments provide the capability to work more efficiently and to significantly improve productivity and quality. Now, I'd like to say a few words about COBOL runtimes. Obviously, it's a concern for a lot of you out there, and it concerns me as well. Like you, I'm a long-term COBOL guy. I understand what you guys are going through. In my mind, runtime fees have been around for a very, very long time. In the past, it was more generally accepted because the companies who purchased COBOL compilers did so because they were either offloading development activities from the mainframe or they were moving application workload from the mainframe. But look at it this way. If you were developing an application in, say, Java or C# or VB.NET, you wouldn't be paying runtime fees for any of these applications. It's simply not reasonable for customers who are committed to COBOL for them to be saddled with these sometimes very onerous fees. The bottom line is, runtime license fees are just plain wrong. If your compiler vendor is telling you that runtime license fees are necessary and that you have to pay for the privilege of using their runtime, then they are increasing your total cost of ownership. Not to put too fine a point on it here, but if you pay those runtime fees, you're just lining their pockets. Runtimes should be free. And with Fujitsu NetCOBOL, they are free. Now, I know several companies that have had to pay a great deal of money because of their COBOL, because their COBOL compiler vendor did an audit of their runtime installations, and they found that they weren't in strict compliance with the licensing agreement. Make no mistake, if your company uses the other COBOL compiler vendor's COBOL compiler and runtime, you need to be assiduously diligent in your compliance, or you could be exposing your company to potential financial liability. The other COBOL compiler vendor offers no flexibility in their licensing policy and may make you pay far more for what you need. Again, with Fujitsu NetCOBOL, we don't care how many runtimes you use or where you are deploying those runtimes. They're free. No audits for compliance, no financial penalties, and no hassles. One other thing, free runtimes definitely affects your TCO math. Now, the Fujitsu NetCOBOL compiler, compiled applications, and of course the Fujitsu free runtimes can be installed and run in a virtualized environment or directly on the metal. Speaking of virtualized environments, I have to tell you this is a technology that has come a long way. Virtualization is perhaps one of the most impactful technologies created for the data center. Fujitsu has no separate charges or licenses to run your NetCOBOL workload in a virtualized environment, and VMware and Hyper-V are both supported. That flexibility allows you to take advantage of these flexible and cost-effective environments without having to incur a financial liability for running in those environments. Now, at the beginning of the webinar, we polled you on your platform. We took a look at those numbers, and it would appear that some 44% of our attendees are still using COBOL on a mainframe. Let me take a moment to describe to you what you're looking at here with this slide. We have some additional technologies that I think are important for the folks that still have mainframes. First up is NeoKix. NeoKix provides a set of tools and execution support that integrates with Visual Studio.NET to facilitate the migration of CICS, or in Europe they say Kix, COBOL applications to the .NET environment. CICS applications are transformed into an ASP.NET application. Next up is NeoBatch. NeoBatch is GT Software's solution for migrating mainframe batch jobs to the Windows.NET environment. It provides both the support for migrating your application batch jobs to Windows servers and the ability to enhance those batch jobs in the future taking advantage of Microsoft's PowerShell or JScript. NeoSort is the high-speed batch sorting component of our COBOL solution, our Neo batch solution, and it sorts COBOL and other types of data files. When it's integrated with Neo batch, enables support for dfsort and syncsort batch sort commands. And finally, we have NeoData. NeoData migrates vSAM data to Microsoft SQL Server without rewriting legacy COBOL code. This means that you can provide your application users with all of the benefits of having data stored in Microsoft SQL Server without having to go through all of the difficulty and risky code and data transformation that would normally happen with vSAM files. Now, if you'd like more information about any of the Neo suite of tools, please contact us. We'd be happy to discuss the capabilities with you and would be happy to arrange a proof of concept of the technology. As I've indicated, Fujitsu's focus has always been to provide value and performance. Their fundamental philosophy has been to build a quality, standards-compliant COBOL compiler and make it affordable. The NetCOBOL editions that are available are NetCOBOL for .NET, NetCOBOL for Windows x86, NetCOBOL for Windows x64, NetCOBOL for Linux x86, NetCOBOL for Linux x64, NetCOBOL for Solaris. Again, all of these compilers are less expensive than their principal competition, Micro Focus. This is something to think about. Since the cost of the compiler is less expensive, so is your maintenance. And one other thing I'd like to point out is that there is no maintenance fee for the free runtimes either. Companies who purchase Fujitsu NetCOBOL enjoy significant savings over Micro Focus. Now, let's go ahead and take a quick look at Fujitsu NetCOBOL in action, shall we? First up is a customer. They are a state department of licensing that was using an old Unisys mainframe. They felt that the mainframe itself was falling further and further behind, and from a technology perspective, that's actually a very correct call. An analyst firm that they had retained warned the DOL that if they didn't move off the mainframe within 5 years, they'd be taking a huge risk. They had many, many issues. It was an old and difficult machine and architecture to work with. They also had a whole lot of loss of talent in the data center that supported the old platform. Interoperability with other systems and outside agencies was also a pretty major problem. But by migrating their COBOL applications and data off the old Unisys mainframe, they were able to decommission the unit and redeploy their application on a Microsoft Windows server. By migrating it, they actually got some very, very significant and substantial savings to the state. They met their main goal for the migration by putting themselves on a platform that had a future, so that the critical line of business applications that the Department of Labor had could be fully supported. Another NetCOBOL success story is a Danish banking services provider. This company is a consortium of banks that jointly owns a service bureau operation. Now, the challenge for these customers, and this particular customer rather, was that they had to provide state-of-the-art systems for their customers while also keeping costs in check. They were being charged a significant amount of money because they were consuming more mainframe MIPS than was allowed on their contract. And the mainframe was costing too much and was certainly not as open as .NET was. The Service Bureau operation services 5.8 million accounts for 146 banks. They process over 200 million transactions per day with a system that has over 11 million lines of COBOL code. In the new environment, they were able to recompile their COBOL programs using Fujitsu's NetCOBOL for .NET compiler. Their new environment was 30 mirrored servers with Microsoft Windows Server. They reduced their costs by $16 million while maintaining 99.8% availability. This adoption of Microsoft.NET and the recompile of their COBOL using NetCOBOL for .NET allowed this customer to better support their customers and be more agile in the face of consistently and constantly changing customer and government regulatory requirements. So, whether you're looking to migrate your COBOL, CICS, and batch JCL from the mainframe, or whether you're looking to save money on expensive runtime licenses, we believe the time's right to consider migration to NetCOBOL. Now, we at GT recognize that this can be somewhat daunting. You may not have the staff available to undertake these sorts of efforts. To assist you in this process, we've partnered with several trusted partners that have a deep industry experience with the mainframe and mainframe applications. They have deep experience with application migration and, of course, deep experience with COBOL. There are tools and technologies that these partners have developed over a period of time that they use to facilitate migrations of this type. So again, if you're looking to save money, it's time to refocus your COBOL. So if you're interested in learning more about NetCOBOL, please reach out to us. You can visit us on the web at www.netcobol.com, or you can also follow us on social media. So Brandy, now, do we have any additional questions, or do we have questions for our audience?
Hi, Tim. Yes, we do. You actually do have some questions waiting for you. But I've received a couple of requests so far asking if we would be making the webinar recording and slides available to everyone that attended today, and the answer is yes. Look for a follow-up email later on this week, and we will be more than happy to share with you the recording and the presentation slides in that email. All right, Tim, ready for your questions?
Go for it.
All right, here's your first one. It's about NetCOBOL for Linux. Can you tell me if NetCOBOL for Linux works with the Oracle database?
Yes, it does. It fully supports Oracle database. We utilize the Oracle Pro COBOL precompiler for that.
Okay, great. Let's see. Our next question is actually about NetCOBOL for .NET this time. Does NetCOBOL for .NET create fully verifiable code?
Yes, it does. The NetCOBOL for .NET compiler emits MSIL and is compiled and assemblies are created the same way as any other Microsoft .NET component. So it is fully verifiable code that's emitted out of the NetCOBOL for .NET compiler.
Okay, great. And while we wait for see if we have any other questions that come in, I want to remind everyone attending today that if you do have a question for Tim, we do have some more time. So you do use the chat panel located at the bottom right-handed side of your screen to send in any questions. We want to remind you one more time that we are doing a webinar series, Refocus Your COBOL. Today was actually our first webinar, and as you'll see on your screen now, we have the other two webinars in the series coming up in early April and early May. The one in April will discuss agility, while the one in May will discuss quality, and we're really looking forward to those webinars, and we hope that you'll all come and join us for them. So back to questions. I do have a couple more for you real quick here, Tim.
Sure.
Can you use RM COBOL version 4 data files with NetCOBOL?
The data files would probably need to be converted to Fujitsu's data file format, but it isn't a significant challenge for us to do that. One of the bases of the old Fujitsu file format actually came from RM COBOL, so they're actually pretty close.
Okay, great. And our next question, can you create NetCOBOL applications that will run in Azure?
Yes, we can. We have full capability to utilize the Azure SDK, and that is actually a deployment target for our NetCOBOL for .NET compiler and for NeoKix.
Okay, great. Now that looks like, oh, we just had another question pop in for you, Tim.
Okay.
Look at you, inspiring conversation. All right. To migrate a procedure, does it need to be to the last release of AccuCorp, or is it possible to migrate an old compatible version?
AccuCorp has a different dialect than Fujitsu NetCOBOL does, but fortunately we have partners that have a dialect conversion tool that can take your most recent version of your AccuCorp or your AccuCOBOL and convert it to NetCOBOL for .NET, or rather just NetCOBOL if you like. If you want to deploy, for example, to a Linux environment, that could be accomplished as well. So again, there's a pretty easy way to get there, with the code converter technology that some of our partners have. I would suggest that on that particular one that you give us a call and allow us to point you in the right direction on that particular item. Okay?
Sure. Okay, here's a question. One of our friends out here has this scenario that I want to share with you and see if we can give them some help. We have ISAM files, not VSAM. Can you convert mainframe COBOL to your product and ISAM to SQL files? And then what SQL version?
Yes, we can take those. That's one of the principal capabilities that Neo Data would help you with. As long as you have a COBOL copybook and we have the ability to read the ISAM file, we can transform that automatically to SQL Server. What Neo Data will actually do is create an endpoint at SQL Server. It will generate generate DDL and create the SQL Server table, and it will actually take the data that's converted and propagate that into SQL Server. There are a couple of options for that, and what I would suggest that we do is have a quick technical conversation so that we could get a little bit more information, and I can give you some more detailed options as far as how to make all of that happen. But Neo Data is the appropriate technology for you in that particular instance.
Okay, great. I do have 2 more questions that just came in. What could be the impact for a small company to migrate to .NET for COBOL? To have COBOL to migrate to .NET. Okay.
Sure. I mean, aside from the fact that you eliminate your runtime fees, you get a compiler environment that is very tightly coupled to what's going on with .NET. If you are going to .NET, if you're not going to go to .NET and you just want to remain as native Windows, you have a very high-performing, standards compliant COBOL compiler. And again, it's both of the compiler technologies, the NetCOBOL for Windows and NetCOBOL for .NET, are very, very effective. They have very flexible and effective environments for your COBOL programmers to work in. So I think it could be a very, very efficient environment for you, and certainly a more cost-effective environment for you.
Okay, our next question is actually about active COBOL users in particular. How come so few active COBOL users, which is now Micro Focus, advised to migrate?
Actually, that's an interesting question. We have actually started to see more and more active COBOL users investigate the possibility of migrating over to NetCOBOL, principally because they didn't want them to make the switch to Visual COBOL. And I think one of the biggest challenges is always been a little bit of the dialect, because AccuCOBOL, to its credit, had such great support for a lot of different kinds of platforms, and they had a rather interesting approach to dealing with some ancillary tools and capabilities that they built into their product. We have, with some of the dialect conversion technologies that are available now, that have been developed by GT Software, Fujitsu, and other partners, the ability to take AccuCOBOL source code and convert that to NetCOBOL for .NET or NetCOBOL for Windows, actually NetCOBOL for Linux as well. Also coming in the next version of the NetCOBOL compiler will be full support for the C$ string constructs that typically gets used with the AccuCOBOL folks. So we're moving towards greater and greater, I guess, parity, if you will, with some of the AccuCOBOL customers. We certainly have a way for them to get to NetCOBOL, and we'd love to talk to you about making that happen.
Okay, great. And on that same vein, I do have another question here for you. Now, is it possible to use Micro Focus and NetCOBOL files together with the 2 languages so that this person, their company, could migrate slowly, or more slowly, rather?
Yeah, I actually have gotten this question before on a number of occasions. The problem is that the file formats are actually very different. The internal formats are very different. You know, if there was some kind of EXTFH component that allowed compatibility between the files, that might be a potential opportunity there. But that technology has not really borne fruit. It really is something that is hard to do. So the way that we advise our customers is go ahead and utilize NetCOBOL for .NET or NetCOBOL for Windows. Go ahead and recompile. There are partners that have the capability to take care of the little dialect issues that you're going to run into with Microfocus. There are things in there like CBL underscore routines or COB underscore routines that are supported. We have support for a good number of those, and I think that we can assist you in that process. But running them side by side is probably not the best idea.
Okay, and would you, another question we have is, ODBC not an option?
ODBC, there are ODBC products that will allow you to read Microfocus files. They've been around for a long time. It's been a long time since I've actually run into them in the marketplace. I'm certainly sure that might be a possibility. There is no ODBC interface for the Fujitsu side, but if you did have an ODBC for Microfocus, that might be a good way to implement that kind of approach. But again, keeping on a single compiler platform is actually going to be more advantageous to you from a development perspective. You won't have a bifurcated development path or a branched source code situation. And of course, there's also the idea of saving a lot of money with the NetCOBOL compilers.
Okay, and our next question, does NetCOBOL have an animator? If so, where can we get information about the animator?
Yeah, we actually call that a debugger. I know about the animator. I've spent a lot of time with the animator. I had used Microfocus COBOL since version 3.14 back in the old 16-bit days. So I'm very familiar with that kind of that technology. We actually have debugger environment that is when you're in Visual Studio, we use the Visual Studio debugger, and of course in the NetCOBOL for Windows world, it has its own debugging environment in the project management tool, and we have debugging capabilities in the Eclipse tool. Okay? Okay,
great. Our next question, are the ODBC for Microfocus slower than rewriting the reads?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. We'd have to find out.
Okay, great.
We'd have to find out. If you would, I'd love to know, I'd love to connect with you and visit with you just a little bit about that, and I'm speaking to the person who had the question. Please let Brandy know who you are, and we'll be sure and answer your question directly, okay?
Okay, I have a comment and a question here. Apparently everybody from Microfocus wants to migrate, and they're asking to give us a tool.
You would like a tool. That is actually music to my ears. Let me talk with our partners and see what we can do. Okay?
Okay, great. And for our friends who had the question that we didn't quite have the answer for, we do have your information, and Tim will follow up with you. Okay. Oh, I have one last question pop in here. Wow, Tim, you're very popular now. Can you speak to developer licensing? How does that work?
I'm sorry. Say that again, please, Brandy.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you speak to developer licensing? How does that work?
Developer licensing, it's a per-seat license. You buy your compiler. You buy your compiler, and you use it the way that you would use any other compiler. If it is the NetCOBOL for .NET, it is a plug-in directly to Visual Studio. If it's NetCOBOL for Windows, we have a Windows project management development environment that has the editor and debugger and all of the other things that you would normally expect to see in a modern development environment. And of course, we also have Eclipse. So the compiler basically sits on a developer's workstation, and you use it just like you would normally use in in Microfocus. It's where you get to the point where you're deploying your application and using the runtimes that we really have an opportunity to give you a different experience. Okay?
Okay. Now, does anyone have any last-minute questions before we close out the webinar? If so, you can use the chat panel at the bottom right of your screen. Ah, we got one more. How would NetCOBOL run on a Windows server?
It runs great on a Windows server. Microsoft has a very well-known operating system to Fujitsu. We've been supporting it for years and years and years. So it's certainly a platform that we're quite capable of running in, and we have very, very good performance in that environment.
Okay, great. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us today on our webinar. Tim, thank you for a great presentation, and of course, thanks to all of you for participating in our polls and asking some really great questions.
You bet, and thank you, Brandy. And again, on behalf of GT Software, Fujitsu, and all of our trusted partners, I'd like to thank each of you for your time today. Please remember that we have some additional webinars in this series, and I look forward to spending some time with you during our next webinars. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.
Thank you. Have a great day.